No, sir, it's illegal. The sanctions are this and that and that, and you will take to court because of giving money to the campaign. The CEO would say, okay, I won't give money. Or I will give money, but secretly, because I cannot do it openly. Now, we change scenario. And the one who is asking me is a lord of a baron or a baron of a criminal cartel. And he asked me, can I give money to the campaign? And my answer is, no, sir, it's illegal. Can you imagine the absolutely no deterrent effect of that with a man who is devoted to illegality as a business? So we need the rules, but that won't deter these guys from giving money to campaigns. The responses to this: solid institutions in the macro sphere. We need to avoid or reduce discretionary power. The more discretionary power we have, the more opportunities we have to introduce this kind of favors and compensations. We have to reinforce judges and prosecutors' capacities and also to give them security, physical security. We are now fighting not only with campaign finance, we are fighting with violence in our communities. We have to enhance the capacities of audit and control authorities. We have to give them teeth in order to do the work. We have to strengthen whistleblower protection. The second line of solutions that I will mention is transparency. Secrecy fosters corruption and creates the opportunities for this flow of money from criminal organizations. So we have to increase the risk of detection and to increase the costs of corruption in order to generate another climate, another environment in the fight against this kind of campaign financing. We have to eliminate loopholes in the regulation. There are plenty of windows to introduce this money. We have to reduce social tolerance to corruption and to this kind of activity. This is very important. This is very hard to do. This long-term work, but we have to do it. And we have to reduce impunity. Afterwards, they are looking for impunity. We have to reduce the opportunities for impunity. What's the role of electoral bodies? Electoral bodies should strengthen their capacity to audit political finance. And auditing political finance is not a mathematical activity. Income, 10, expenses, 10, results, 0, everybody's happy. No, that's not auditing electoral campaigns financing. We have to give these organizations and agencies the possibility to cross-check the information to find whether these drawings are true to life or they are just drawings but by a very efficient accountant. We have to generate the possibility to find out what are the patterns of the illicit money coming into campaigns. Mexico, the Instituto Federal Electoral, is working on that, trying to map how this money comes to the campaigns in order to be aware, to look at the signals that should be there in order to find out whether there is or not illicit money coming into the campaign. We have to work, or these organizations, the electoral bodies, have to work in coordination with other public agencies. The electoral body alone cannot do this. It has to work with information coming from the tax agencies, the bank supervising agencies, the units devoted to anti-corruption, anti-money laundering activities in the country. They have to cross information in order to find out whether the returns from the parties are really what they should be reflecting. We need strong and effective sanctions, and we need strong enforcement rules. And From the point of view of civil society organizations, and that's very important for the work of IFE in many countries and for the work of Transparency International, there's a lot that civil society organizations can do there. Awareness campaigns, showing the people that this is not a problem of elites, political elites. This is a problem that affects everyday life of everybody in a country. Monitoring political finance, working in independent disclosure, use of access to information tools. Work together with investigative journalists. That's very important. We have to work together. And we have to work in this topic in a global context. This is not a national problem. This is an international problem. So the collaborative work should go far away the frontiers of a country. The electoral body, the civil society organization, journalists have to work together in an international context. We have lots of work to do, so let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delia. At this point in the program, we turn to question and answers, discussion. As is our custom, I would ask that you identify your organization, your affiliation, and introduce yourself before posing your question or comment, not necessarily a question. I'd like to open up the floor at this point. As is the prerogative of the chair, I'd like to ask we do have a question. Okay, sorry. Yes.
My question goes more into what sort of best practices have you seen or exist already in the region to fight what you are exposing is a problem. Delia put together a group of very interesting policies that could be implemented or approaches to do that, but have that worked and where and what you think can be done in the future to continue replicating those?
Very good. Please.
I think that the fight against organized crime in campaign finance is a new one. Many of the tools have been put into place in order to fight private illicit money in the sense that exceed the limits or violate the prohibitions, for instance. In some countries, contractors of the state cannot give money to the campaign. So what the countries have worked in is devoting disclosure mechanisms that can detect that kind of money coming into the campaign, and then, if they have a good system of sanctions, applying those sanctions. So in that way, we are better than 20 years before in Latin American region in terms of transparency. We know now more information than we knew 20 years ago. In some countries, we have worked in getting this information pre-election, because one of the topics here is work for the informed vote. The voters have the right to know something more about the candidates than just the picture with a beautiful smile or the quantity of children they have greeted along the campaign. We need to know who is behind. So we need this information before the election in order to the voters to decide the vote on an informed basis. And in 4 countries of the region, at least Argentina, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Brazil, and Peru also, we have the possibility to know some information. We won't know everything in this field. It's an eternal fighting. But we know now some information. In many countries, I use the example of a French political party, which is very clear and true to life. It's not a lab example. Some years ago, the Green Party in France presented candidates to the assembly, won some seats in the assembly, and a year after, an investigative journalist found out that the main contributor to the campaign was a chemical lab from Switzerland that has been penalized by the European courts for polluting the river Ring. And that was the main contributor to the campaign. My question is, shouldn't the voters know that before the campaign, before the election, in order to know how credible the candidate was, how coherent was the discourse or the program of the campaign vis-a-vis the compromises or the commitments that, or the favors he was hiding from the people. That's why pre-election information is very important, and we in Latin America, and we are working in this line. But there's a long way to go, and not particularly with organized crime.
I would just add briefly, I think one of the things that Delia said, and I'm actually working with an ARD project in Guatemala with Siglo XXI right now on investigative journalism. And I think that that's also one of the keys. You mentioned the collaboration with investigative journalism. It's very difficult to get facts, figures, numbers, et cetera. And one of the things we were talking about with the group, because they wanted to do something on campaign financing, was where they wanted the present system, who benefits from the present system. And they thought about it, we talked about it for a long time, and essentially the correct answer was the current Congress and the current president, the current political structure benefits from the holes that exist. So it makes it very difficult to change those holes if the political class is the benefiting class from not having accountability. So I think that the ability to push that information out into the public domain, particularly in the new media, particularly in radio, TV, because newspapers, unfortunately, from my personal background, I'm very sorry to watch them sort of die, but they're not the driving force anymore. But there are, I think, investigative journalism, and you have El Faro in Colombia, I mean in Salvador, you have Plaza Pública, you have Chamorro's group in Nicaragua, you have Gustavo Gorriti's group in Peru. All of these really interesting investigative journalism forces going on now in countries that unfortunately do not have a very high degree of internet penetration. But where they do penetrate and where they're able to shine the light that traditional media is no longer willing or able to do, they have a tremendous impact.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for your presentation. My name is Diana Marie Watts. I come from Brookings, and I have the following question. You mentioned the desire of drug cartels and organized crime in general of taking over the alcaldías, but I wonder with a potential and quite likely comeback of the PRI in the presidential sphere, do you think this would bring about more negotiations under the table as it used to be? Because it's well known in Mexico that the PRI allowed for many of these negotiations, and I wonder if that could be a potential comeback.
It's for
The hot potato.
Well, yesterday there was a very important news in the press from Mexico. The main leaders of the three more important parties of the country came together and declared that they are going to blindar, I don't know the name, armed candidates against criminal organizations. So this is important. They didn't say how are they going to do that, but they declared that with these words. So it's an important change because that means that they are aware that this is not only, okay, I take your money and nothing happens. Now it's a risk. People is looking at that, and they are worried about the infiltration of money. We won't stop under the table money going into the campaigns. Nobody has done so. The difference between countries is the reaction. We have scandals on political finance in Germany, Italy, United Kingdom, United States, and the underdeveloped countries in Latin America, if you want. But the difference is not how rich the country is, how strong the regulation is, but how does the country react against this kind of things. The reaction is the difference, and we have to see the reaction there.
I think directly on the question of the PRI and their negotiations in Mexico, I think that there was a time until fairly recently when that was viewed as the PRI was the power, so you negotiate with them. One of the complaints when I was doing a Woodrow Wilson study on bulk cash shipments that the narcos now have is that they have to pay off 3 parties. You can't just buy one party and expect it to go forward. So you might have the alcalde of one party, but you might have congresistas from the other party, and you have it all spread around. So I think the point is that drug trafficking is no longer party-centric. I don't think they care about the ideologies. I don't think the PRI is particularly more dangerous than anyone else. I think it comes down to the personal disposition of the candidate to negotiate with that, or their vulnerability. If they have something that they can be blackmailed with. And I also think that if you if you look at how this plays out, we're in a period of time where ideology is really disappeared, and the amount of money it takes to infiltrate into a campaign at a lower level is also much less. So you have the ability of narcos; they can buy all 3 candidates if they want, as long as they get what they want. So I'm not personally as concerned about a party as the system, and as Delia said, the reaction is the key. And we've now moved a little bit. In what happened in Colombia was they went from total acceptance of drug presence to the words of saying, oh, we shouldn't do this, to now having much more effective methods of not doing it. I think Mexico is now in phase 2 of at least acknowledging that if you're caught taking money from a known narco, you're going to have trouble. Okay, that's a scandal. Now, that means you have to be more careful right now. It doesn't mean you don't do it. It means you have to be more careful.
Yeah.
But the next step will be the societal rejection of narco money in general, and you paying a political price for taking money, or the perception you're taking money, and that's when you begin to have a serious change, I think.
Thank you. I'd like to pose the next question to Douglas. Thus far, much of the discussion has related to the capture of the state through reaching the political leadership, through elections and those holding elective office. But looking at security forces and the role of the activity of narco traffickers, specifically in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, is there any evidence of capture of the security forces, be it local police or armed forces, national armed forces, and how has that impacted security in general?
Well, I think that I think yes, there's ample evidence that the short answer is yes, that's happened. No, I think if you look at El Salvador, you have a really interesting phenomenon. I think one of the tragedies of Central America, in that when the war ended, the thinking, and I was there covering it and thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, they dismantled the police. And they said, okay, we're going to have 1/3 of the police are going to be former security forces, 1/3 FMLN, and 1/3 new people. And on paper, it seemed like a brilliant idea. And like I say, I was there thinking, oh, this is fantastic. What immediately happened when the police forces formed was that the old security forces that were there immediately had no loyalty to the new institution. They immediately ran their intelligence networks on behalf of their prior patrons, and essentially the far right. The FMLN did exactly the same thing with the left, and the new people who came in had no experience, no clue, and were sort of cut out of the process immediately. So if you look at El Salvador today, you'll see that the Venezuelans and Cubans are running separate apparatuses for parts of the FMLN. The far right is running their traditional apparatuses on behalf of the Guatemalans through Guatemala and elsewhere for that section. And the only group that has no real intelligence is the government. They have no capacity or ability to run into serious intelligence operations, and that's a tragedy. So I think that there are historical reasons why that happened. I think that one of the reasons why we keep seeing countries call in the army is because there's a perception that the army, having been marginalized, reduced, and pushed back, is not on the, as corrupted as the other forces. Certainly, this is, I think, the perception in Mexico. Although I think the perception is rapidly changing as they're exposed to that sort of money and they move forward. So I think that it's. I think that the point Delia made earlier, I think, is crucial. That you're not asking them to do anything. You're asking them to do nothing, and that's so much easier. It's asking them to be gone at 10 o'clock. It's asking them, when they were looking at the major movement of illicit goods from from Salvador into Guatemala, they found that at one key point, the guy would go to bed at 10 o'clock and leave the retén, the gate open. So after 10 o'clock, you could just roll through and nobody's going to say anything. And everybody knew that one place to cross after 10 o'clock, you were home free. All he did was go to bed. it was brilliant. Yeah. So I think that it's and if you look at what they target, the narcos will always target the border crossings. They'll always target
Frontiers,
aduanas, customs, and because those are fundamental to them moving across borders. And border regions, because they belong to everyone and no one, are particularly vulnerable and particularly easy to target. But yes, I think that it's one of the great. And then Guatemala, you have the whole deep, dark history of the security forces going back many, many years. But I think you're seeing the same thing similar to El Salvador happen in Nicaragua, where you have the old Sandinista networks very active in non-state activities as well. And you hear a lot of reports about the former Contras going back to their ways. So I think the old traditional smuggling routes that were very active during the conflict years are vital. They simply have morphed into a different, there's the same pipelines with different products in them. And without ideology to keep people fighting each other, the ability to work together is much higher.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yes. Wait for the microphone, please.
Thank you, Paulina Ojeda from IFES. One of the things that comes to mind as you talk about this, and I've seen it in other countries, is that the people who are at the forefront of fighting, of disclosing this type of information are also in grave danger, because a lot of them, they frankly don't care about killing these people. So one of the things that comes to mind is if there is a way of disclosing the information, of creating certain types of partnerships, of, I guess creating a culture of information that is productive to raising awareness and causing, the changing environment that you discuss, rather than, just saying it because this is wrong and then somebody gets gunned down and that's the end of that champion. So then you have to wait till the next brave person steps up. So that seems to be a big problem for me in terms of, what resources, what people do we have that are willing to step up and take the fight.
You are absolutely right, and not from the point of view of IFES, but from Transparency International. We have created some mechanisms to protect the champions making this information public. One is SAFE, the acronym is SAFE, which is a rapid reaction security intervention group within Berlin's secretariat, but working all over the world. And the other one, at the level of some chapters, we have almost 100 chapters all over the world, is what we call ALACs, which are particular groups that help people to manage this kind of information they know. We are also working in whistleblower protection, not only about these institutionalized organizations or agencies within the chapters or the organization, but passing laws and creating some kind of accompanying system for whistleblower in the cases of disclosure of this kind of information. But in many countries, you know that this is very dangerous. Even in some developed countries in Latin America, it is dangerous. Your telephones are tapped, you are followed, your computer suffers strange phenomena when you connect to internet or things like that. But we have to keep on fighting.
I think one of the other keys is in the journalistic community, having watched a lot of folks that I knew and well get killed in Colombia. One of the huge problems that they're facing now in Latin America is that when I was covering the stuff in Colombia, there were numerous foreign journalists, and we would work collaboratively with El Tiempo or El Espectador, and then I would publish the story first, or someone else in the U.S. media would publish the story first, and then the local El Espectador would say, according to the Washington Post, boom, and then they had a degree of separation, although a lot of it was their work, and we worked together, and it was a tragedy they couldn't publish under their own name. And I think one of the proudest moments that I recall in journalism was when El Tiempo, El Espectador, and the Miami Herald and several other newspapers in Colombia did a massive joint investigation. It was the first investigation into the Medellin cartel. It was Pablo Escobar, the Ochoas, his led all that crowd. And they published the exact same story simultaneously in 5 or 6 newspapers. And that made it impossible for the narcos to react in any particular way against anyone in particular. And I think one of the things we're trying to do with the ARD project in Guatemala is hook those people up with the Salvadoran, Honduran, and Nicaraguan investigative teams so you can publish regional stories that everybody contributes to so that no one in particular is at risk. It's not a foolproof system, but it's one of the ways. Collaboration among journalists, you can convince journalists to put aside the competitive structure on certain specific issues where they can share the risk and spread it out. It's a tremendously potent weapon because then the narcos really are angry, they're pissed off, and they don't have any idea what to do about it. And that's a good place to have them.
I think related to that, before that we started, Douglas was mentioning the downsizing of foreign bureaus.
Yeah, right.
And so you don't have that collaboration that you had in the past and that space maybe that was able to be
Exactly.
created
No, I
and through those collaborative efforts.
Yeah, exactly right.
I'd like to invite a member of our board of directors, Sheila McLean, who I neglected to introduce at the beginning. But Sheila, we welcome your question.
Thank you. I want to join with everyone who's thanked you for the analysis that you gave. It is compelling, and it is also depressing. I have 1,000 questions. I'll only ask one, but I would like to drill down a little bit on the issue of sanctions, particularly because you pointed out, and rightly so, when it's organized crime that we're talking about, the sanctions just don't seem to be relevant. Again, borrowing a question from someone else who asked a very good one here, do you have any examples of, because I have to confess that I'm a lawyer and I do believe in rule of law, and the legal system working here or not working here is so critical. Do you have any examples of sanctions that might work or might have worked? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
I think that we have different types of sanction in political finance regulation. The most common ones is fines, but if they are important, they can have some deterrent effect. But if you have to pay $120 for a pre-campaign of 1 year, you just put that in the budget of the campaign, and that's all. The following step in creation of sanctions or designing sanctions in political finance in Latin America has been to work with public funding. In many countries, public funding is very important. If you sanction parties and or candidates